Ladies and gentlemen, who saw Captain Phillips? The movie Captain Phillips. Put your hand up, be bold, be bold. Quite a number of you. This is the lady, this is Vice Admiral Michelle Howard, who saved Captain Phillips. So let's just get that out of the way quickly. Have a seat. Vice Admiral Michelle Howard is the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Operations, Plans, and Strategy. But a few years ago, she had, I mean, I'm just putting this out there because she's an intimidating person, and you guys didn't get to have the fun I did with her in the green room. She's hilarious. I've advised ARPA-E.
We did take the flexi cuffs off before we came out.
Yeah, it would be a much more fun thing for all of you if you weren't watching us up here, but we had a camera back in the green room, and you were listening to what we were really saying. But she was the commanding officer of Task Force 151, which led the rescue operation for the Maersk, Alabama. That has nothing to do with our talk today, but it does take us into this broad question of thinking about energy and security. And a lot of people here are trained to sort of think about energy. What is the Navy? What is the military and the Pentagon? What's Chuck Hagel doing to conserve, to move into renewables and all that? But that's not your job. That's another guy's job. And we're having you here to talk to us a little bit about the war fight. I mean, I asked her because I do a lot in foreign policy, and she said to me the best ambassador is a warship. So can you give us your strategic frame on how you think about what does the world look like from an energy security perspective to you?
So let's start with the Captain Phillips rescue. So why was Maersk, Alabama out there anyway? There's about 30,000 merchant ships a year that go through that part of the world. And these are just good citizens of the world moving trade, moving energy. In the case of Maersk, Alabama, they were under sponsorship to move food into Somalia to help feed starving people when the ship was taken hostage. So what the navies of the world do, it is our responsibility to help keep the sea lanes open. And for all of us, the way the world has unfolded in the last 30, 40 years is energy. And the movement of energy is a significant part of global trade. It's about 41%. So and trade by volume at sea has quadrupled since the 70s, from the 1970s till now. So when you talk about disruption of oil movement, liquid nitrogen gas, liquid petroleum gas, you think about what an impact that was on us in the 70s, the gas lines and everything else. If it happened today, it'd be an even much more significant impact. This country gets its energy from 3 major areas right now. We get about 200 million barrels a year from Canada, and about 160 million barrels a year from Mexico, and then about 160 million barrels a year from the Middle East. So we have taken ourselves more off the reliance of the Middle East, but you're still talking about a quarter of what we get comes from there. So then when you look at the Strait of Hormuz, and 47 million barrels a day flowing through the strait. That's an impact if something happened there, that it was closed. That's an impact on this country, but it's an impact on every other country around the world. And those are our trade partners. And so it would have ripple effects throughout the entire world's economy.
I think it's a very important point. A lot of people, when they talk about American energy independence, all of a sudden seem to be putting the United States in somewhat of a silo and not necessarily looking at strategic allies. I mean, and this has really come to point with Europe, or we've seen a lot of amazing events in Ukraine. People forget in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of brinksmanship between Russia and Ukraine, where Russia essentially, to extort more money, essentially, I'm sure I've offended some people with that, but basically drove up natural gas prices. And so you've got a lot of these soft points in energy supply around the world, but if the United States hopes to have influence with Japan, with Europe, it also, your Navy has to protect their oil and energy interests.
So a good example of how things cannot go well, even just a natural disaster, when you think about Fukushima, but then you think about parts supplies and auto industry and those parts flowing to the United States. Well, that's a natural disaster that illustrates to us, okay, when a huge trading partner, when their life and economy is disrupted, that has impacts in this country because the parts aren't showing up here. So the same thing.
And that happened.
And that happened.
Yeah.
So the same thing It's like when the Port of Los Angeles shut down for a strike, it was about 7 or 8 years ago. That had about a $750 million a day impact on this economy. So when it's disrupted through natural disaster, the whole world comes together. But if it's disrupted because someone has control of that energy and either tries to disrupt the global commons, not allow the flow of energy, it will have impact on every country in the world.
So when you sign up for this and you're in, you've got you are the, as I understand it, the highest ranking, the first 4-star.
I will be the first.
You will be the first 4-star. They haven't confirmed you yet,
I
Congress?
am confirmed,
okay.
But I'm still worried. I'm still strategy.
Well, if you're confirmed, why didn't you have your 4th star?
I haven't been promoted yet.
I see. Well, she's about to get her 4th star. I don't know if that was leaked out yet, but pretty amazing person. But when you're sitting in Energy Security 101 and you're in line for this job and you're sort of looking at this, how does the United States Navy and the other integrated military look at yourself as just providing all global security everywhere? What are your priorities? How do you look at China? Where does Latin America and Africa fit in? What does the world map look like to you?
So we with our allies and partners, we look at the global commons and understand if there's concerns in the global commons. The strength of us getting to resolution is in our interoperability and our willingness to work together. And navies have a unique way of coming together at sea, teaming up and figuring out how to do a zone defense or offense. And so when you look at counter-piracy off of the Gulf of Aden or Somalia, EU had a task force out there, NATO had a task force out there, US had a sponsored task force out there. So there's countries from around the world, Singapore, Turkey, Italy, United Kingdom, Australia, and then we combine in different ways as staffs and then as ships, and then we provide this overarching umbrella of safety for all the merchant traffic to come through. If you're looking at a potential disruption, then it would be the allies and partners who get together and say, that's an area of concern. The conflict and near conflict that's been going on in the area of the East China Sea and South China Sea, the diplomatic friction that remains, the disputes between the major countries out there, China, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Brunei, that is an area that we all keep an eye on. And we want to see all those nations get to agreement in a diplomatic way, but if they don't, then the best ambassador is a warship. That's how it works.
So what happens when the other guy thinks the best ambassador is a warship, too?
They generally are wrong.
Yeah. So when you're dealing, I mean, one of the things, because one of the big energy questions out there is Iran. And you mentioned Fukushima when the tsunami hit Japan and you had the Fukushima nuclear reactor disaster. And you had Japan shut down more than 50 nuclear reactors. Japan all of a sudden was in a very, very different energy picture. And for those of you who sort of look at Japan as this nice little pacifist nation, it's one of the strongest nations in the world with a huge military capacity, and it's part of the stability platform in Asia. And all of a sudden, if you in fact did have a conflict with Iran or in the Gulf area, a friend of mine who used to head the International Energy Agency, Nobuo Tanaka, said, we're not going to get Saudi oil. No one's going to get any oil. And you've got ships. We have ships patrolling those straits. Until recently, and I think it's calmed down a bit, you had a lot of small Iranian craft constantly harassing U.S. boats. You're a pirate hunter, I've been told. And so how do you handle when it's the right time to strike versus when the time is to show restraint?
So for that particular part of the world, the U.S. Navy has been there since World War II. And then there's Western ties to that part of the country that go back well beyond that. And it's a little bit more than the small boats, the fast attack craft they send out. If you recall, in 2012, the government actually made threats to shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
That energized a lot of different governments. So we had allies and partners send mine countermeasure ships to the Gulf, and then we would do demonstrations through exercises. So we had NATO nations there, Middle East nations there, where we would show that we are capable of clearing the Straits of Hormuz should Iran choose to mine them. And it's just sometimes that demonstration of partnership in action that we're exercising together to send a signal that gets people's attention. The biggest thing that the Navy does is we provide presence. We were white, so we're the away team. We are globally around the world, us and our Marine Corps partners, so that if a crisis happens, we're there to respond.
Aren't you around the world less and less?
I'm
just mentioning this because Secretary Hagel rolled out the budget yesterday, and it doesn't look like you're adding a lot more new stuff.
So for the Navy, we have actually gotten smaller from 9/11 to today. We were about 318 ships, and I think this morning we were at 283. We have kept the percentage of
You checking on a daily basis?
I do, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah. Hoping to get, it goes
One
to
more?
289.
So we're at what, 283 today?
To 283.
Yeah, that's tweetable. 283. And what did we have at 9/11?
It was about 314.
314. And what does Chuck Hagel's budget do to you?
We're probably gonna go down just about it's not his budget, it's Department of Defense budget, but we'll probably be about 279, and then we'll start going back up. That's within the next couple of years. I think the uncertainty is beyond that.
And is that enough platforms to
so
do
what I was about to say is that we have maintained the percentage of deployed. So even as the Navy dropped down in the number of ships, we have maintained about 95, between 100 to 95 ships deployed. Out and about, whether it's out, we have 4 deployed ships in Japan. We're increasing the number of 4 deployed ships. The Donald Cook just got to Rota, Spain. We'll have 4 destroyers there over the next couple of years. So you want to be where it matters when it matters, so that if the government needs options, you're there. You can respond.
Now, you just told me a new ship is going to be commissioned, the Zumwalt.
The DDG-1000 Zumwalt.
And what does the DDG-1000 do?
She'll be a missile platform. She'll be able to do strike, and she looks pretty slick, so she'll be pretty stealthy as well.
And you told me the captain's name
The captain's name is actually Captain James Kirk.
Commander
James Kirk.
And I also happen to know through a birdie told me you're a bit of a Trekkie.
Probably more than that. Thank you for outing me in front of a public audience. So, no, but that's a good segue. So this ship has this wonderful electrical platform. And I mean, she's going to have enough capacity to generate enough electricity for a mid-sized city. But back to the Star Trek model, what I used to think was so neat was that they could re-maneuver power from the propulsion.
Captain Kirk would call Scotty and say,
give me more for those photon torpedoes, give me more for the shields. And it's that kind of thinking, taking the electrical power of a ship, being able to make it fungible, move it from propulsion, move it into an energy system. And so we're getting ready to send out a laser as a demonstration this year, in 15.
A laser?
A laser demonstration on one of our ships out in the Gulf. Then you just use energy. You use energy as your propulsion system, and then you use electrical power as your weapon system.
So you're going to reroute energy,
right?
To fight a war, to go into warp drive.
For strike.
The ship version.
Well, I mean, if somebody out there invents the lithium crystals, I'll take them. We're not. We're not there yet, but just having an electrical and all-electric ship and being able to move energy around for different uses, that's our future, and that's where we need innovation.
You know, one of the things you talk about fungibility and being able to move these resources around. I am interested in this broad strategic question of how the U.S. continues to manage this stewardship responsibility it has for global energy security. And you have the rise of India, you've got the rise of China. I imagine if we're lucky, we'll probably see a new direction with Iran down the road at some point. So you're going to have Iran become a very, very a different kind of country. So you've got a lot of new nations coming in and potentially displacing the kind of old thoroughfares that the incumbent great powers did. How often do you think about these rising powers, and is it a 3 a.m. Phone call problem for you?
So a lot of the rising powers are, I think, going down a path of responsible nationhood. It's a power that may not be rising, that's not going the path of responsible nationhood. So, you know, North Korea is one that bothers me. There's a leader there now who has a framework that's hard for us to understand. You normally say, well, if I do this, the person's going to do that. And you've got a single leader who's can move an entire government, and that type of almost capriciousness about the way he governs, that's where you have real vulnerabilities in the world. That's where I stay focused.
You know, this group, we've got a lot of business people in this room, academics, a lot of government policy practitioners, and some of what this is really about, this is the 5th anniversary of ARPA-E's forum, is to think through what the ecosystem of big strategic leaps in energy are. And there's a lot of talk about game changers and disruption. And to a certain degree, you know, my experience in the military, why you occasionally do get strategic leaps in kinds of military, is it's much more risk averse than that. And I'm interested in, with your kinds of responsibilities, do you think about game-changing technologies that are coming online that might help you?
Oh,
do you think
all the
about,
time. But it's interesting.
Can you give us some insight into that?
It's interesting. You feel the military is risk adverse?
A little bit. I mean, but maybe we have different, you know.
I'm going to go back and get the flexi cuffs.
Okay.
Again. So
I grew up as a DOD dependent, so I may be a little, saw the wrong end of it.
Well, yeah, I would say we're thoughtful risk takers, but we prize innovation just like any other organization does. And so then when you're talking energy, and you're talking broadly strategically, energy security, in the 70s we called it energy independence, is very important. You want to reduce, from a warfighting perspective, your vulnerabilities. So for a service, for us, because we're globally deployed, energy security might be you can burn lots of different types of fuels so that you're not beholden to one source. And so then you take away that vulnerability. Energy independence might be the bases we have stateside, have resiliency, but they have self-perpetuating energy so that our training ranges and our computer systems never shut down, so the people that we rely on back stateside, intelligence analysts, can go 24 hours a day. So then if the electrical prices go up, it doesn't impact them as much. If you have resiliency, they don't deal with the same brownouts or any other issues when things don't go well or there's a natural disaster in this country. In independence, energy efficiency for the Navy gives us energy independence, and that's important from a warfighting aspect. The classic is Admiral Rickover creating nuclear-powered submarines. And you think about how strategic deterrence is supposed to work. The enemy, the adversary, has to be afraid that if they strike you, you will strike back. So by creating nuclear-powered submarines, the adversary doesn't know where our strike capability is. He can't target it. So it is a credible threat that we can respond if we're ever attacked. The reason you want to go to something like nuclear-powered energy is because the adversary knows where you are every time you pull into port. And so when you have nuclear energy, so submarines, you use the depths of the ocean to conceal where you are. You go on a long patrol. Nobody knows where you are, but they know that you're there and you have credible power. So when you're energy independent, it can give you warfighting capability that's important for mission success.
I mean, what you're really talking about there, I mean, it's very interesting about is exposure. So exposure of energy capacity, refueling, depots, things of that sort. So when you're thinking about what might be the likely targets, you know, during the Cold War, Russians were targeting us, we were targeting their capacity.
Innovation, you think about World War and World War II and how that, just the use of aircraft drove synthetic oil being created.
Right.
So there are scenarios that happen in warfighting that force militaries to be innovative, force governments to be innovative.
And a lot of these people are engaged in that sort of innovation.
Absolutely. So
You know,
for the Department of Defense, we have, for the Navy, we have engineers at NAVSEA, NAVAIR, and then we have organizations like DARPA, but clearly there's a tremendous amount of collaboration with private industry to
have we gone far enough? Because one of the things when after 9/11, there were a lot of gloomy predictions at that time that thought that the underbelly, what was exposed in our chemical industry, in our energy infrastructure, in our nuclear all of that was going to be so easily attacked, so easily undermined by those that wanted to do the nation harm. And I honestly don't have an idea of how far we've moved along. Maybe you have a snapshot of how far the military has moved on or the Navy has moved on in hardening or hiding or making less vulnerable that infrastructure. But just take your stars off for a minute and kind of critique.
I could never do that.
Yeah, okay. But kind of critique the country in how far along the path are we in whether it's hardening or at least making less vulnerable that kind of broad energy infrastructure in the country.
So I think when you think about where we were at 9/11 and from a military perspective, when we had to have all the gate guards and all the additional people, and you just think about the appearance of a military base now as you go through, or even to go visit someone, and the different systems that we've put in place, the different monitoring systems. So our ability to monitor and detect has gone up significantly. And I think across the country, in some areas, when you think about what we've done with sensors or what we do now with camera systems around the country, and there's been some cities that have just, I think, probably really moved out farther. And then all of that is we're in a very different place than where we were before 9/11. Probably the biggest preventive measures, though, is really the intangible things, the sharing of information, being able to not just respond to an attack, but to be able to prevent attack is where this country has moved the farthest.
You know, I told you we were going to talk more about energy security than renewables and other things, but it has come to mind that, and I don't know if he's here today or not, but I interviewed recently the guy for Citigroup who is responsible for helping to line up project financing for many of the sort of green projects around the world that Citigroup finances, and whether it's new technologies or just whole new, large-scale projects. And I asked him whether he was the fig leaf for a company that was doing a lot of bad things. In other words, was he essentially there to be the token, environmentalist and the token innovator thinking this area when 1% of the assets of Citigroup, there 99% are out there doing all different things. And I'm interested because there is a sort of tension between what you've described, I think, quite ably, which is a very key fundamental warfighting mentality and capacity. The last thing probably on your mind is whether you're adding to carbon emissions more than you should be. And that's probably as it should be. But there's another big chunk with another lesser starred admiral. He is lesser starred? The other gentleman who's responsible for renewables?
Oh, that's in his portfolio?
Yeah.
No, he's the same rank.
He's a 4-star?
He's a 3-star.
A 3-star.
I'm
Well,
not a
soon you'll be a
4-star.
4-star. But in that case, the Navy and the Pentagon, to a certain degree, has tried to engender at least a lot of conservation efforts, deployable renewables, trying to find other things. That's a very different task. But when you're in meetings, how does that sort out? Like, are you, obviously warfighting takes priority, but how do you deal within the kind of broad strategic map of plans and operations for the Navy? How do these other things fit? So
there's a piece there, though, where energy and energy efficiency does contribute to the warfight. So you have to, you just think about something like batteries for communications. And then if you want to lighten the weight for a CB or for an explosive ordnance, a disposal specialist, you want to miniaturize that power as much as you can. That's not an easy thing. So when all of these things, if you, well, do I want my laptop to be able to run out in the middle of nowhere? Do I need for it to be able to be solar power? Carbon emissions, I care about them in a different way. If there's a heat-seeking missile, I want to reduce my heat signature. So how we look at it from a warfighting perspective often aligns quite well with energy efficiency.
When you think about the global commons, and I was impressed about the responsibility, sea lanes are vital, absolutely vital, partnerships are vital. What do you think, what are some of the lessons that those of us that are engaged in other aspects of global diplomacy and building skill sets in other responsible stakeholders around the world, what does Brazil need to do? What does India need to do? What are the lessons that they're not, what are the things they're not doing today that they could to help manage that global commons in a way that you'd be satisfied with?
Well, from a naval perspective, we have strong relationships with all of our South American partners and particularly with India. For all of us, it really gets down to the relationship, whether it's diplomatic or it's a military or it's business to business. It's the trust in that relationship. So it's our willingness to continue to train together at sea, exercise at sea, build knowledge of each other's cultures and how we work. So that if once you go from...
But those are the people we already get along with, right? But India we don't get along with all the time, well, maybe half the time, 3/4 of the time.
So, but it's also the conduit to how you get to less misunderstanding with folks you're sort of on eggshells with. So if we have opportunities, we just started this last year engaging China, and the CNO of the Chinese Navy came to visit the United States. So then that creates dialogue opportunities. It's the establishment of that relationship, but then that translates to something as simple as ship COs at sea communicating with each other. That's important because when you don't communicate with someone, that's when misunderstanding happens, and then that's when misadventure happens as well.
When you're not going after pirates and watching old issues of Star Trek and planning, global strategy, I understand you like to cook.
Well, see, Star Trek's good because everything they talked about came through. The whole flip phone thing, I'm just fascinated. Or I had Bluetooth before we knew it was Bluetooth. I love that show.
Right. Yeah, it's all Bluetooth. I was asking the Admiral earlier, I always ask folks, something, tell me something fun about you that's not out there in the things, and she enjoys cooking. I do
not enjoy cooking.
You do not enjoy cooking? Well, my dinner at home when I'm home is not enjoying cooking either. I just go for a cold can of tuna and peas and just eat them out of the can. But you're quite a chef.
I do cook. My family enjoys my cooking.
Your family enjoys your cooking, and tell them what you make for your husband.
Oh, well, his favorite is, there's a venison dish, elk dop. It's based off a French recipe, so it's slow roasted cook with typical ingredients, wine. I have fresh herb pots out back, so it has thyme and rosemary in it. So it takes about 1.5 hours to prepare.
When do you find the time?
Normally I end up cooking Saturdays or Sundays if we're not out doing naval engagement.
And how often is that?
Most Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah,
now I end up probably cooking about 7 or 8 meals, larger meals like that, straight up and down chicken, whatever it's going to be.
I mean, without getting you in, just to finish things up, without getting you in any trouble, the defense...
Am I in trouble?
No, but not yet. We always wait to the last minute.
Am I going to lose my confirmation?
Yeah, no. I think you're safe. But the budget for the Pentagon did roll out yesterday, or the proposed budget. It does, the headlines were that it shrinks the Army back to levels. You made an interesting comment earlier that the Army had actually ballooned out a bit after 9/11, and the Navy had been shrinking.
In response to the conflict.
If this were a congressional hearing and you were asked sort of what is the broad strategic vision encased in that military and the Navy's particular piece of it as you look out? You know, one of the things we've been talking about in this conference, and a lot of people do, and these are innovators sculpting the future. They're completely changing the future, our interaction with what's possible out there, creating new platforms and technologies that we're going to leverage in different ways. So 5, 10, 15 years from now, this place is going to just feel and look very different. And I'm interested in how the Navy as a complex entity deals with massive oncoming change and positions itself, because otherwise you could become anachronistic over time. I see we got 1 minute. Yep, yeah, don't worry. But can you give us in 1 minute, you know, how you prepare and deploy yourself for the kinds of massive systemic shifts that are coming?
We spend a lot of time thinking about the future and what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So there's that immediate future, the next 10 years, and then alternate futures that go out to 2040, 2050. The world has stayed remarkably the same from a naval perspective. We're still 3/4 water. The choke points have stayed pretty much the same. The flow patterns of trade have stayed remarkably.
Except the Arctic's coming.
That's quite that's a little bit away. That's a little bit away. And so then when you look at where do we need to be, and we need to be forward, we still need to have presence. We still provide deterrence, conventional deterrence. We still provide a visible presence that assures allies. And we still provide a visible presence that dissuades potential adversaries. That expeditionary role has uniquely been our Navy since we went into power projection with the Great White Fleet, and is still our responsibility. And that's what we give the nation. So we're out there so that if the sea lines are threatened, we're there to protect them. We're there to protect American interest and protect American property. Oh, we're right back to Captain Phillips, aren't we?
We are back to Captain Phillips.
Okay.
I think next year we're going to ask, you know, have a relaxation room and ask Cheryl Martin to set up a side room for all of you with Star Trek reruns, and we'll put in Captain Phillips every third episode or something.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Vice Admiral Michelle Howard, please give her a round of applause. Congratulations on your coming 4th star.
Thank you.
Great to see you.